Alright, so I want to apologize for that last video. On that last video, things were kind of blurry. I really don't know what was going on with the camera, because it will focus on one thing and not something else, and it would never focus on what it was actually pointing at. So I actually got a new lens for it. I still don't know what was going on with that. But anyway, mac and cheese. I told you guys that I was going to come back and kind of redo and dissect this mac and cheese. I made it better, but one of the things that I'm going to use here is sodium citrate or sodium citrate, something like that. Anyway, this stuff, it breaks down fat. It turns the fat solids in cheese and other substances like it to break it down, and you get a more consistent, liquidy cheese sauce. Something that's less gritty. It will actually make the cheese velvety smooth. Now this is a I'm gonna say an organic compound, but at the same time it comes from a combination of baking soda, citric acid, and water. And I don't know the exact ratio and measurements for all this stuff. There's this one guy on YouTube that I actually watched make it. His name is Gavin Wade, or I think his name was Gavin Wade, and he actually showed how to make this stuff. I don't recommend doing it because you put too much in one thing, you can make a big mess all over your kitchen. Nothing's going to explode, but you can make a big mess of your kitchen. So I actually just bought some. This was the a brand that I got from Amazon, and I'll actually leave a link down below in the description, which is something that I normally don't do. It's not a sponsored product or anything like that, but it's just, this is not something that people would normally carry in their kitchen. But if you do enjoy, making ice cream and stuff like that, or cheese sauce like we're getting ready to do, I suggest keeping it. But one way that I'm going to do this is by using the sodium citrate, something like that. And I'm going to also use a roux and heavy cream mix. So you're going to get to see me do these two ways. Alright, so you notice with this whole thing of me shredding the cheese and everything, I didn't put up any measurements of how much cheese or anything. And throughout the rest of this video, you're not going to see me do that. And the reason why is because getting into the kitchen is all about exploring and trying something new. The task of making macaroni and cheese from scratch is kind of daunting for a lot of people. And this one is kind of an easy stovetop style. It doesn't involve any eggs or anything like that. So if you want an ingredient list, here's one. But other than that, this is pretty much just kind of trial and error. Although both recipes came out really good. Alright, so in both recipes I'm going to use a roux for both recipes, because I don't want to add too much sodium citrate, one of those, because it's still technically a chemical, and everything has to be in moderation, for good health purposes. But as far as the oil is, I use onion oil, and I actually show you guys how to make that in a later video, but it's gonna add a oniony meat flavor to it. You don't have to do that. You can use a flavorless oil. That's mostly what you will be looking for anyway, making macaroni and cheese. You will want to use a flavorless oil like a canola oil or a vegetable oil, something like that. And basically going to start with a roux. This first recipe is not going to use any of the sodium citrate or lemon juice at all. Alright, so we're going to first start with the roux. And the roux is basically just the 1 tablespoon of butter, 2 tablespoons of oil, and 3 tablespoons of flour. You're going to stir it up, mix it until you notice the flour starts to turn a slight brown color. But you have to let the butter melt first. That's the only way this is going to work. I mean, you can throw it all in the pan at the same time, but it's not going to cook properly. Now, with this first method that uses no sodium citrate or lemon juice, you have to really take your time with the cheese melting process. You can't just dump it all at one time because it'll just start to clump up together, and then you'll be trying to melt something that's technically never going to melt. It's just going to string up in the pot. So you really have to grab small handfuls at a time, throw it in, let that melt, throw another handful in, let that melt, and so on and so on. Also, don't be like me and forget to boil your noodles before you start making the cheese sauce. So after about 5 to 10 minutes, and I say 5 to 10 minutes because everybody's melting time is going to be different, you're going to end up with this smooth, velvety cheese sauce that you can use for your mac and cheese, or take some chips and dip into it. I don't know. But if you have to, you can add a couple of dashes of lemon juice to it, because you're going to want to taste this over time. You want to see if it's still gritty, or you want to see if it's smooth enough, because the lemon juice is going to actually break down the rest of the fat molecules that's inside the cheese sauce. You want to take it slow, because if you try to speed this process up, it's just going to go and it's just going to clump up together. But this is the first one, and I'm actually going to put this to the side, and I want to do a side-by-side comparison of the mac and cheese with the sodium citrate and the mac and cheese without. The key to this mac and cheese is actually the heavy cream itself. I could have went just 1 whole cup of heavy cream, but I didn't, because I wanted this cheese sauce to still be thick enough to coat the noodles properly, versus being watery and I have to add cornstarch and other stuff to it to get it to be thicker. I don't quite know the science to it, but it's adding fat to fat. That's the best way I can say it. But it actually helps the fat inside the cheese to melt better. Milk by itself would not do that.
Has anybody told you one? Have you any idea why?
Alright, so in the second recipe, things work a bit different. You can be a little bit more lazy with this one, because the sodium citrate, one of those, pretty much does all the work for you. So instead of using very low heat, constant whisking, and all this stuff like the first recipe, you can literally just dump everything in the pot after you make the roux and just let it melt. That's it. It's that simple. The only thing about this is that it came out to be a bit thicker than the first one, and I think that's because of the extra fats that we added to it. I guess the fats within the heavy cream just kind of melted away with the cheese sauce, and it just kind of ended up being more liquidy. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but it happened.
Has anybody told you one? Have you any idea why?
So overall, I tasted both of them, and they both taste pretty great. They just had their own aspects, and they're not so much different. It's just two different ways to make them. The onion oil adds a nice flavor to it, and I'm actually gonna go and make a video for that so you guys can kind of see how that's made. It's very flavorful, and it actually fits in a lot of Chinese dishes.